Hey guys, tonight we drift far, far north, where the stars stretch longer across the winter sky, and everything smells like snow smoke and wet wool. You're crouched on the icy edge of a frozen lake, your breath rising in little clouds, a smooth soapstone spoon clutched in your mittenless fingers. Beneath you, a ragged hole chipped through the ice, its edges cracked with frost like broken glass. Welcome to Viking childhood. Welcome to ice fishing for fun. You shift your weight on the reindeer pelt that's supposed to keep your knees dry. It doesn't. Beside you, your cousin Bjorn dangles a braided gut string down the hole, his bait, a half-frozen sliver of dried herring, tied with such precision, it looks more like a science project than food. He hasn't blinked in 10 minutes. The only sound is your own heartbeat and the occasional creak of the lake adjusting itself beneath your feet. Fun, right? So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. I'm genuinely curious. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You try not to think about how numb your fingers are, or how long it's been since breakfast, or how the fish are almost certainly laughing at you from just beneath the ice, because this is what Viking kids did for fun. No tablets, no TikTok, no indoor heating. Just you, a spoon, and the vague hope of dinner wriggling its way up through ancient glacial water. Mainstream historical fact. Viking children were expected to learn practical survival skills early, and fishing, especially ice fishing, was both a necessity and a form of entertainment. Kids used simple tools, learned patience, and competed to see who could catch the first or the biggest fish. But let's be honest, your spoon isn't helping. You've tied a bone sliver to a gut thread, added a shiny shell bead for attraction, and still, nothing. Bjorn swears by his family bait secret, but you think he's just making excuses for hogging the good spot. Quirky tidbit. Some Norse villages believed whispering to the fish hole would bring luck. You try it. You lean in and mutter in your most serious 10-year-old whisper. Come on, little fish. I won't even eat you. I'll just show you to everyone and let you go. Bjorn snorts. Liar, he says. You shrug. Then, a tug. You freeze. Tiny bubbles rise up through the hole. Another tug. This one's stronger. You pull gently, gently, and then wildly, because the line is dancing like it's caught a sea serpent. And then, snap. The line breaks. Gone. All you're left with is a splash and the smug smirk of your cousin, who still hasn't caught anything either, but now somehow feels superior. Historians still argue whether Viking kids saw fishing as a chore or a kind of game. Was it joyful learning or child labor with a pleasant spin? Maybe both. Either way, the lake wins today. You pack up cold and a little damp and start the trudge home. Your fingers feel like rocks. Your knees feel like regret. Your pride is bruised, but your story solid gold. By the time you retell it by the hearth tonight, that fish will be the size of a goat, and you nearly fell in saving your cousin's life. At home, your mother shakes her head at the empty basket. Again, she says. You nod, solemnly, as if your failure is a holy offering to the god Njord, Lord of the Sea. You warm your hands by the hearth. Someone hands you a hunk of barley bread. You eat it like it's the best fish you never caught. And tomorrow you'll go back out. With a spoon. Because that's what Viking kids do. Your boots squelch as you land hard in the muck again. The bog beneath your feet oozes upward like it wants to swallow you whole, and your arms flail for balance as you launch into the next patch of semi-solid ground. Bjorn's already 4 jumps ahead, howling like a wolf pup on mead. This is your version of tag, Viking style, and it's called bog hopping. You're soaked up to the knees. There's no prize, no trophy, no one yelling. Go, but for some reason, flinging yourself across half-frozen, mossy marshland in the middle of nowhere is the most fun you've had all week. Your cloak flaps like a sail as you leap from tuft to tuft of grass and sod, doing your best to avoid the places that bubble ominously or smell like ancient farts. This isn't some rustic misadventure. This is elite-level childhood sport. You're not just playing, you're surviving in style. Bjorn shouts. Last one to the elk skull gets the elf curse. You don't want that. Definitely not the elf curse. Because according to your older sister, elves live in bogs. And while the grown-ups say elves are just stories, nobody is brave enough to call her bluff. Not after what happened to Snorri's ear. He says it fell off from frostbite. She says it was elf punishment. You believe her. Mainstream historical fact. Viking-age kids, especially in rural settlements, often played in the same outdoor environments their families worked in. Bogs, streams, fields, and forests weren't playgrounds in the modern sense, but they were where fun happened. Children learned agility, toughness, and navigation by just being thrown outside. And so here you are, flinging yourself across increasingly suspicious puddles and making every jump feel like a leap across a bottomless abyss. Your next jump takes you right into a patch of cold mud. You sink shin deep. Your socks are gone. Bjorn laughs so hard he almost slips into a puddle himself. Nice form, he snorts, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. You glare. You smell like old cabbage. That's not technically true. But it distracts him long enough for you to leap past him, arms pinwheeling straight onto the patch of turf crowned by the elk skull. It's bleached white and sort of mossy. The socket eyes stare up at you like a 1,000-year-old referee. You win. You don't know what exactly you've won, but it feels glorious. Quirky tidbit. Some Norse children believed stepping too close to the wrong bog hole could lead you into another realm, Elfheim, the land of the hidden people. So naturally, you and your friends always dared each other to go closer. You weren't just risking wet socks, you were tempting magical exile. You clutch the elk skull like a trophy, then drop it. It's heavier than it looks and smells faintly of something that might still be haunting it. Bjorn catches up panting and red-faced. You cheated, he huffs. Did not. Did too. Did not. Fine, he says. Race back. Historians still argue whether Viking children's rough and tumble games were encouraged as training for adult roles or simply tolerated as part of daily life. There's little evidence of toys in the archaeological record compared to weapons or work tools. But maybe that's because the world was the toy. You race again this time, slipping and skidding back toward the firmer earth of the sheep pens, your cloak plastered to your back, and your laughter echoing through the trees. By the time you stagger home, you look like a failed swamp god. Your mother eyes you from the loom bench and sighs the sigh of mothers since time began. She peels off your tunic with tongs and tells you not to sit on anything important until you're clean. You don't care. You beat the elf curse. You outran Bjorn. You conquered the bog. And tomorrow there'll be more. Because that's what Viking kids do. You've never heard a sound quite like it, the sharp ping of soapstone hitting your toe at full velocity. You hop backward, clutching your foot, and drop the rest of your marbles into the dirt. Bjorn, of course, is laughing so hard he nearly drops his own. That's what you get, he says smugly, adjusting his pile. The Viking version of marbles isn't exactly gentle. The rules are simple: knock your friend's soapstone ball out of the circle using your own. The problem: these marbles aren't smooth and polished like modern ones. They're uneven, sometimes chipped, and occasionally shaped more like angry potatoes than spheres. Your cousin's lucky stone is clearly an old button from a cloak brooch, but nobody's calling him on it because he's on a 5-win streak. Your best one, the one with the fleck of red quartz that looks like blood, now sits half buried beneath a goat pellet. Typical. Mainstream historical fact. Viking children often played with carved objects made of bone wood or stone marbles included. Excavations in Scandinavian sites like Jorvik and Hedeby have turned up small, rounded soapstone balls assumed to be used in children's games. Quirky tidbit. Some soapstone marbles had runes scratched into them not for luck necessarily, but as a way of naming the marble or marking it as property. Bjorn says his rune means victory. You think it looks more like a chicken. You nudge his prized marble with yours. It rolls gently, gently, then stops half an inch short. You groan. Bjorn pounces like a hawk, launching his own missile with an exaggerated flick of the wrist. It hits your marble dead on, sending it spinning into the grass. Another point for him. Another bruise for you. You contemplate declaring war. Double or nothing you offer. Only if you give me your smoked herring at dinner. Done. Historians still argue whether such games were meant to build hand-eye coordination for hunting, or simply a way to pass the time in a world where winter lasted forever and adult chores started young. But one thing's certain, competition ran deep. Even your grandma once admitted to stealing a game piece from her cousin Ingrid. That witch had it coming, she said. The match intensifies. You're crouched in the dirt, hands, muddy nose running slightly from the chill eyes narrowed with tactical focus. One of the goats comes too close and almost eats a marble. Bjorn shoos it away with a growl. You finally manage a solid strike. Bjorn's marble bounces out of the circle and right into a patch of slush. You pump your fist in triumph. He glares. That one doesn't count, he says. Ground was uneven. You chose this spot, you point out. Still, you both sit there for a moment, catching your breath, arms flecked with dirt and wet grass. Around you, the village hums quietly, women tending to wool, someone chopping fish near the shore, and the low groan of a cow that has apparently realized it's not part of this game. Then Bjorn leans forward. Let's build a tournament. You know what that means? A full-blown bracket. Players recruited from every corner of the Longhouse world, cousins, siblings, even that terrifying 3-year-old who bites. The grand prize. Probably an old comb or a piece of smoked cheese, but that's beside the point. You nod. At sunset, it shall be done. And with that, your sore toe forgotten, you wander off to spread the word. The marble games of the fjord are coming, and this time you're going to win. The first mistake was borrowing your father's war shield. The second mistake was climbing to the top of the snowbank behind the longhouse with it. The third, sitting on it. You're not entirely sure how you're still alive. The world blurs into streaks of white and blue as you plummet down the slope, the heavy wooden shield clattering over ice-crusted snow like a thunder god's dinner plate. You try to steer by leaning slightly, but that only makes things worse. You spin. You bounce. You hit a frozen turnip someone tossed out the night before, and briefly achieve low-altitude flight, and then you crash. Face first into a snowdrift. It's actually kind of peaceful in here, buried nose-deep in icy fluff. You can hear the muffled sound of Bjorn's cackling somewhere above you. There's a piece of your braid frozen to your lip. You consider never moving again. Mainstream historical fact. Viking shields were round wooden and reinforced with a metal boss in the center. While they were crafted for battle-bored children, who likely had access to older or broken ones, almost certainly repurposed them for games including sledding. Just don't ask the warriors for permission. You finally emerge from the snowbank like a frost zombie blinking against the pale sun. Your cheeks sting. There's snow in places snow shouldn't be, but the thrill worth it. Bjorn skids down the hill on his own contraption, a piece of curved whale rib tied to a reindeer hide. Show off. He actually sticks the landing, which earns him polite applause from the goats chewing hay near the fence. Quirky tidbit. Some Icelandic sagas casually mention children playing on ice hills or frozen rivers, sometimes using sleds made from fish bones lashed together. One overachiever even tried it with a shield covered in horse fat. He did not survive. You trudge back uphill, dragging the shield behind you like a flattened turtle. Your hands burn from the cold, but there's no way you're stopping now. Not after that performance. This time you try a different tactic, knees instead of sitting. It's less aerodynamic, but gives you a vague illusion of control. Bjorn shouts advice from behind, lean left at the stump or you'll hit the goat pen. You nod, you launch, you hit the stump, but miraculously miss the goat pen instead, carving a sharp turn that sends snow spraying in all directions. You arrive at the bottom upright, triumphant, and only mildly concussed. Historians still argue whether shield sledding was common or just one of those probably happened, but nobody wrote it down things. But given the Viking love for both physical daring and practical repurposing, it's not hard to imagine. Later, you and Bjorn pile snow into a crude ramp, determined to invent the first ever Viking jump. It goes exactly as expected. You both end up upside down, laughing so hard your ribs hurt. Your mother sees you limping home and eyes the shield suspiciously. What happened to your face? Shield combat training, you say with solemn pride. She raises an eyebrow. Right. That night, as the fire crackles and your bruises settle into deep purples and heroic tales, you already know tomorrow's plan: 2 shields. One for each foot, like skis. What could go wrong? You grin at Bjorn across the longhouse. Race you at dawn. You've been chewing on the same sliver of driftwood for 20 minutes now. Not because you're hungry, though let's be honest, you usually are, but because you're trying to whittle it into the shape of a troll. A friendly one. Or maybe a goat. Honestly, it's starting to look like your cousin Ingrid's face, which might be the same thing. Your only tool, a butter knife. Not a fancy ceremonial dagger. Not even a dull farm blade. Just a thick, slightly bent bronze knife with the edge of a sai. Your grandmother handed it to you with a straight face and said, "It'll build patience." That was 3 splinters and 2 bleeding thumbs ago. Bjorn sits next to you on the log trying to carve a bear. His look's more like a sad potato. He says it's abstract. You believe him because it's polite. Mainstream historical fact. Viking children often imitated adult tasks, carving, weaving, even metalwork in miniature. Wood carving was not only a form of play, but a crucial skill, and kids were introduced to it early, often using whatever tools were deemed safe enough by their elders. Which usually weren't. Quirky tidbit. Some Norse parents gave their children dull knives carved from antler to train on, which were still sharp enough to cause injury, but at least wouldn't lop off a toe. There's even a carved rune stick found in Norway, with what appears to be a child's scribble practice, a mix of words, names, and possibly insults. You inspect your creation. The troll has one leg shorter than the other, and what might be an ear sprouting from its chin. You pretend it's intentional. Bjorn nods solemnly. She looks fierce. She does you agree. She guards the sheep. Historians still argue whether children's carvings were purely recreational, or if they served religious or magical purposes, tiny idols, tokens, or even offerings. Maybe your crooked little troll is a guardian. Maybe she just keeps the wind from stealing your spoon. Carving is slow, painfully slow. And that's part of the game. The soft hiss of knife on wood. The occasional grunt when something snaps off that wasn't supposed to. The satisfaction of shaping something with your own hands, even if it ends up looking like a lumpy turnip with feet. Bjorn suddenly gasps. I made a hole. You look over. His potato bear now has a sizable divot where the eye should be. It's a battle wound you offer. He beams. Yes, it fought a dragon. You both nod, proud of the carnage. Your troll now has battle scars too, and perhaps a missing arm. No matter. She's fiercer that way. Around you, the village moves in slow rhythm, someone chopping wood, someone stirring soup, a baby crying for reasons unknown. But here in your small, sacred log space, you and Bjorn are creators, artists, gods of wonky forest creatures. Eventually, your grandmother returns. She eyes the carvings, squinting. Is that a duck? No, you say. It's Ingrid. She nods once, accurate. You and Bjorn collapse into snorts. The sun begins to dip, throwing long shadows across the muddy yard. You gather your tools, okay, tool, and cradle your misshapen troll like treasure. You may not be a master carver, but you made a thing, and that's enough for today. The wind whips your cloak behind you like a banner as you crouch behind a haystack. Eyes narrowed, heart pounding. In your hands, a clump of mud molded into the most aerodynamic blob you could manage. Across the clearing, Bjorn peeks out from behind a sheep cart holding his own mud missile and wearing that infuriating grin that means he's about to break some unspoken rule of engagement. This is war. Viking child style. You've spent the better part of the afternoon recruiting allies Ingrid, who's got the best aim in the village, and Halvard, who mostly just yells but looks intimidating with mud on his face. Your enemies Bjorn, two of his older cousins, and a one-eyed rooster who seems entirely too invested in the conflict. The battlefield is the farmyard dotted with hay bales, woodpiles, and one very confused cow. Mainstream historical fact. Norse sagas and archaeological findings suggest Viking children engaged in mock battles, often mimicking their parents' warrior culture with wooden swords, makeshift shields, and war games that doubled as combat training. Organized chaos was apparently character building. Quirky tidbit. Some scholars believe Viking kids used animal bladders as balloons during play, possibly tossing or kicking them like early footballs, which when you think about it makes mudball warfare seem tame by comparison. You signal to Ingrid. She nods and hurls a mud clump over the haystack. It arcs beautifully and lands squarely on the back of Bjorn's head. You can hear the splat from here. He stumbles dramatic as ever and yells, "Betrayal." You pop up, launch your own mudball, and duck as one whistles past your ear. Halvard charges with a stick held high, roaring something that might be Old Norse, or possibly just a really intense sneeze. This isn't just play. This is ritualized sibling combat. A sacred tradition passed down through generations. Historians still argue whether these games were formally taught or instinctively developed. Were kids encouraged to train in mock raids, or were they just left to invent their own mayhem as long as nobody lost an eye? Well, maybe just one. The mud flies fast and furious. You're soaked, freezing, and slightly unsure whether that last handful came from the ground or something much less dignified. But your side's winning. You push forward, rallying your troops toward the enemy's crumbling defenses, a log stack fortified with a smelly sheepskin and two suspicious-looking cabbages. Bjorn retreats to the chicken coop, slipping in goat dung and losing a shoe. You seize the high ground, literally a small, overturned barrel, and declare victory with a triumphant roar that scares 3 pigeons and possibly the ghost of your great-uncle. Then silence. Everyone's panting, grinning, caked in filth. Halvard's missing a sleeve. Ingrid's got a leaf in her hair and looks like she's just conquered England. Call it a draw, Bjorn shouts from the coop. Only if you surrender the cabbage fort. Deal. You meet in the middle, exchange muddy handshakes, and share the spoils, a shriveled apple and half a honey cake someone forgot about under a bench. By the time your parents find you, the yard looks like it's been raided by trolls. Your mother sighs so loudly, the chickens freeze. Again. You look up dripping and proud. We were training. For what? You glance at Bjorn. He shrugs. Manhood. She hands you a bucket. Start washing. You grumble, but secretly you're thrilled. Because tomorrow you'll invent a new game. Something involving turnips, or shields, or fire. Probably not fire. Definitely fire. You're hunched over in the half-light of the longhouse, holding your breath, trying not to sneeze. In your hands, a bundle of straw, 3 fish bones, and a knucklebone stolen from the dog's food bowl. Across from you, Ingrid is meticulously stacking shells and feathers into what may or may not be a sorcerer's shrine. This is not a game of chance. This is Trollocast, the ancient and definitely not made-up Viking game of fortune. Okay, yes, you and your friends did invent it. But that doesn't make it less sacred. The rules are elaborate, maybe too elaborate. There's a throwing phase, a stacking phase, a chant that must be whispered backward so the elves don't steal your luck, and then the final toss, 1 knucklebone into the air, 1 fishbone onto your opponent's knee. If they flinch, you win. If not, well, they probably blinked, and you'll argue about it for the next hour. Mainstream historical fact. Viking children engaged in a variety of object-based games, casting lots, playing with bones, and creating small-scale competitions with sticks, stones, and carved runes. Archaeologists have found gaming pieces and dice in Viking graves, suggesting the value of play extended into adulthood and the afterlife. Quirky tidbit. Some Viking-age dice had uneven sides or repeating numbers, possibly to cheat, possibly due to poor craftsmanship, or possibly because, well, physics wasn't their strong suit. And sometimes children made their own dice from sheep vertebrae, which explains why the family dog is glaring at you. Ingrid gives you the signal. You chant the rhyme Audi Vadi Troll and smoke fishbone flick and knuckle poke and toss. The bone lands perfectly. The fishbone arcs and slaps her squarely in the forehead. She doesn't flinch. She grins. You lost. Again, you mutter. She's already restacking the shells. Historians still argue whether children's games like these were meant to simulate divination rituals, or if they were simply pastimes loosely inspired by adult superstition. Either way, you're pretty sure Trollocast is real magic. You saw Bjorn win 3 times in a row and then find a coin in the dung pile. Coincidence, maybe. But you're not taking chances. Bjorn joins in halfway through round 4. He brings a puffball mushroom, insists it be part of the ritual, and blows spores into Ingrid's face during a roll. She smacks him with a broom handle. New rule, no mushrooms. You play until your knees hurt, until the bones are too slippery with sweat, to hold until the sun sinks and the fire glows low. And when your mother calls for supper, you scramble to hide the evidence beneath a loose floorboard. Because the first rule of Trollocast: no grown-ups allowed. It starts with a stick. That's how these things always begin. You're walking by the shoreline minding your own business when Bjorn appears beside you holding a driftwood branch that is clearly too long to be practical. Duel, he asks, already swinging. You parry with your own shorter stick, lighter, easier to swing, probably formerly part of a broken rake. You don't even respond. The answer is always yes. The clash of wood on wood echoes across the bay like a miniature battle horn. 2 kids, muddy-booted hair, tangled by salt wind, reenacting legends they barely understand but believe in with their entire souls. Odin would be proud, or at least amused. Mainstream historical fact. Viking children were known to mimic adult roles through play, including mock combat with wooden swords and shields. Archaeological digs have uncovered child-sized weapon replicas, some with intricate carvings suggesting these weren't just toys, they were training tools. Quirky tidbit. Some Viking-age toys even included miniature boats and longhouses detailed enough to suggest that adults encouraged kids to practice adulthood through play. And while no actual stick-fighting manual survives, sagas mention children settling disputes with games that escalated quickly. Sound familiar? You and Bjorn circle each other, kicking up sand and seaweed. The rules are vague. No hits to the face, no crying unless it's dramatic, and first one to fall owes the other a chunk of honeycomb or a fisheye depending on availability. You lunge. He sidesteps. You both end up slipping on the same wet rock and tumbling into a heap, groaning, laughing, tangled in kelp and pride. Historians still argue whether play fighting among Viking kids was ritualized or casual. Some believe it taught valuable coordination and discipline for later battles. Others think it was just a great excuse to whack your friends without consequence. Back on your feet, you switch to shield forms. A round piece of bark becomes your defense, a garbage lid from the gods. Bjorn wields a dried fish. You question the logic. He insists it adds +3 agility. You go with it. As the game heats up, more kids join cousins, siblings. The weird girl from the smokehouse who only speaks in grunts. The shoreline becomes a melee of squeals and stick thwacks. Someone's using a sheep jawbone. Someone else has a bucket on their head. Eventually, the tide starts to come in. You stand triumphant on a drift log, hair whipping like a war banner, arm raised high with your victorious stick, until a crab pinches your toe. You fall. Bjorn declares himself Jarl of Sand Battle Bay. You concede defeat, for now. That night, as the fire crackles and your muscles ache in the best way possible, you trace battle wounds with your finger, a scrape here, a bruise there. Medals of honor, marks of memory, and tomorrow, a rematch. The sun isn't up yet, but you are. Because today is market day. And that means one glorious thing, mischief. Your mother is already busy tying up bundles of wool and jars of pickled turnips. Your older sister mutters curses while trying to comb the knots out of her hair. You're supposed to be helping. Instead, you're crouched behind the cart, carving your name into the edge with a piece of broken comb. It's not vandalism, it's legacy. By the time the ox is hitched and the goods are loaded, you and Bjorn have already made a secret pact. The goal: acquire the weirdest object in the village market without paying for it. Not stealing exactly. More like creatively bartering. Or confusing the seller into thinking it's theirs. Mainstream historical fact. Viking markets were lively gatherings filled with traders, craftspeople, musicians, and travelers from far beyond Scandinavia. Children would often accompany adults, sometimes to help, sometimes just to observe and occasionally to cause a bit of chaos underfoot. Quirky tidbit. Some Viking children used pieces of amber as toys or currency. In fact, one Icelandic story tells of a child who traded a frog for a bronze pin. Not a real frog, a carved one. Possibly enchanted. Probably not. As you arrive at the market square, a patch of flattened earth ringed by tents and carts, the smells hit first: fish, smoke, honey sheep. And people. So many people. You spot a man with a falcon, a woman balancing eels in a basket on her head, and someone selling what might be roasted crow legs. The possibilities are endless. You and Bjorn split up. He goes for the food stalls. You veer toward the traders with shiny things, beads, bells, bones carved into animals. Your eye catches a wooden spoon with runes scratched into the handle. Definitely cursed. You want it. You approach the old man at the stall. He's half asleep, chewing something that might be bark. How much, you ask? He squints. For what? You point. The spoon. That spoon, he frowns. That's not mine. Victory. You hold it up. Then I'll just take it. Only if you tell me a story. You blink. A story. You can do that. You launch into a completely made-up tale about a goat who becomes king of the fjord. There are boat races, a singing fish. The goat banishes taxes. The old man snorts halfway through but lets you finish. When you finally stop talking, he waves you away with a gnarled hand. Keep it. That goat had vision. You beam and scurry back to Bjorn, who's holding a dead beetle on a string and looking pleased with himself. I win, you say, holding up your rune spoon. He nods respectfully. Close one. Historians still argue whether market visits were formal learning experiences for Viking children or just another chaotic element of communal life. But based on your experience, it's both. You learn a lot by watching grown-ups yell about cheese. The rest of the day is a blur of voices, colors, smells, and secret trades. You eat something called blood pudding and immediately regret it. You find a frog in someone's boot. You almost buy a chicken, but it glares at you and you decide against it. As the sun dips, you curl up in the back of the cart beside the bundles, your new spoon clutched in one hand. Bjorn hums a sea shanty made entirely of wrong notes. The ox plods forward. The market fades behind you. You didn't buy a single thing, and yet you came back rich. You are 6 minutes into your most dangerous mission, yet sneaking into the family longship without being noticed. The goal is simple: commandeer. The vessel become captain of the North Wind and sail into legend, or at least push off from the dock and paddle around in circles for a bit before someone notices and yells. The ship smells like tar salt and the sweat of 100 journeys. The oars rest quietly along the sides like sleeping beasts. The sail is tied down in heavy bundles, but in your mind, it's already full and billowing, streaked with thunderclouds and victory. Mainstream historical fact: Viking longships were the pride of the Norse, and young children often grew up around the docks or on small coastal voyages. Though actual raids were for adults, exposure to ships and seamanship began early, sometimes even through small boats and mock journeys for training. Quirky tidbit: some Viking parents crafted miniature boats for children small enough to float in fjords or tide pools. And there are burial sites with boat-shaped toys placed beside young ones, as if to promise safe passage into the next world. You crouch behind a barrel near the stern, watching for signs of grown-up activity. So far, so good. You hoist yourself over the gunwale feet, barely scraping the dock, and land with a soft thud on the wooden planks. It creaks. You freeze. Nothing stirs. Bjorn follows, trying to be quiet, but managing to knock over a coil of rope and a small bucket of nails. He grins. Stealthy as a deer, he whispers. "You mean a deaf deer," you hiss. "No, I meant..." You both duck as someone walks past. After a tense moment, you creep toward the tiller hands, brushing the grainy wood worn smooth by journeys across oceans you can barely pronounce. In your mind, you're heading to Miklagard, to Vinland, to the edge of the world. Historians still argue whether children ever helped crew the smaller boats, or were simply trained near them. But given the complexity of Norse navigation and the close-knit nature of seafaring families, it's likely that small tasks were delegated: sponge bailing, knot tying, or even rudder holding under supervision. Today you're not supervised. You untie the mooring line. The boat lurches, shifts, and sways. Water laps excitedly against the sides. Bjorn grabs an oar. Push off, push off. The longship drifts gloriously briefly into the harbor's shallow edge. You grab the tiller like a proper helmsman. The wind tousles your hair. You are invincible until you hit a sandbar. The sound is unmistakable. A dull scrape, a heavy sigh from the boat, and then silence. You and Bjorn look at each other. "Is this part of the plan?" he asks. Obviously, you say. "We stop here to resupply." He nods. "Right. Restocking, very strategic." The grown-ups find you 10 minutes later. You're told to scrub the entire deck. It takes 3 hours. But during those 3 hours, you whisper commands to an imaginary crew chart. Invisible stars with a stolen spoon, and give orders in your best fake saga voice. Bjorn sings a rowing song that gets stuck in everyone's head. You accidentally invent a knot that no one can undo. The dog eats the map you drew in charcoal. You are banished from the docks for a week. Worth it. The snow crunches under your boots like old bread crusts as you stomp out into the clearing, arms wrapped around your ribs, breath turning to clouds in front of your face. It's winter. Again. And that means one thing in your village sled season. Not the elegant kind with polished runners and fur-lined seats. No, your sled is an upside-down fish barrel lashed to a warped plank with leather cords that smell like last week's goat stew. But it slides. And that's all that matters. Bjorn is already at the top of the hill, hopping from foot to foot, eyes shining like he's about to leap into Valhalla. "Race you," he yells, even though you both know he'll cheat. Mainstream historical fact. Viking children in northern regions used the long winters to invent games in the snow and ice, sledding, skating with bone skates, snowball fighting, and constructing snow forts. Physical activity was considered essential even in the coldest seasons, partly for warmth and partly to keep restless energy from burning down the longhouse. Quirky tidbit: Norse kids sometimes tied animal bones to their feet and used sticks to push themselves across frozen lakes, a kind of proto-skating that may have doubled as transportation and entertainment. And yes, falling was frequent and hilarious. You take your mark. One foot on the back of the sled, one hand gripping the rim of the barrel. The hill ahead of you looks like a snowy mountain of destiny. There are bumps, ice patches, and at least one frozen goose somewhere in the middle. No fear. Bjorn counts down 3, 2, oof, and pushes before one, launching himself early as expected. You yell after him. Dishonorable dog spawn. You leap. The ride is chaos. You bounce, you skid, your teeth rattle. Snow sprays in all directions. A birch branch whips your shoulder. You hit a rut, go airborne for a glorious half-second, and land in a heap of snow and tangled limbs. Bjorn crashes beside you, grinning with a bloody nose and snow in his ear. "I win," he declares, spitting out a pine needle. "In your dreams," you mutter. Historians still argue whether these winter games were culturally structured or spontaneous. Some scholars think they were designed to mimic adult warrior rituals, sled races, as training for quick escapes or snow ambushes. Others think Viking kids were just really bored. You and Bjorn trudge back up the hill, dragging your sleds behind you like battle flags. This time you both agree to ride double, which is faster and much dumber. You take the front, he takes the back. You count. He doesn't cheat. Much. You zoom down, shrieking like banshees, plowing through a snowbank and knocking over a bucket some old man had left outside his hut. A chicken explodes from the top of it, squawking and flapping into the sky like it's escaping the apocalypse. You collapse in laughter, too cold to breathe, too giddy to care. That night by the hearth, your mother notices the bruises. "Let me guess," she says, "more sled races." "No," you say with exaggerated innocence. "Warrior training." She rolls her eyes and hands you a cup of warm broth. "Next time, train your backside to stay on the sled." You grin. "Tomorrow you'll find a steeper hill, and maybe a helmet." The mist hangs thick over the river, curling low like a cat waiting to pounce. You're up before the sun again, this time by choice, because today you're going fishing. Not with adults, no thank you. They get too serious, but with a hand-woven net, a bucket that leaks just a little, and a grand plan to catch the biggest trout this side of the fjord. Or at least a very angry stickleback. You and Ingrid creep down to the shallows, shoes tied tight, cloaks pulled close. The cold water bites instantly as you step in toes, screaming in protest. But you push forward, because this is how Viking legends start, with heroic discomfort and the faint smell of algae. Mainstream historical fact. Viking children often helped with fishing, especially near coasts and rivers. Nets, traps, and lines were common, and children were taught to assist or practice in calmer, shallower areas before graduating to deeper waters or sea voyages. Quirky tidbit. Some Norse communities carved tiny runes or symbols onto their fishing gear for luck, or blamed bad catches on sea spirits who demanded offerings like shiny shells or bits of bread, which probably didn't help with dinner, but did add a flair of drama. You toss your net with all the skill of a seasoned warrior, and immediately tangle it around your own knees. Ingrid sighs, wades over, and helps unravel it while muttering something about last time with the goat. You pretend not to hear. Historians still argue whether children learned fishing primarily through structured mentorship or through the slow, glorious method of trial error and falling in a lot. Based on your current soaked status, it's probably the latter. But luck turns. After a few false starts and one frog incident, you manage to trap a small wriggling fish in the shallows. You both scream like you've discovered Atlantis. Ingrid grabs the bucket. You scoop the fish in, nearly tipping the whole thing over. You've done it. You've caught breakfast. Or bait for breakfast. Bjorn shows up late carrying a crooked stick and a worm so large it could be classified as livestock. He squints into your bucket. That it. You puff your chest. We're selective. He shrugs and wades in beside you, immediately slipping and going under, up to his ears. You don't help. You're too busy laughing. The rest of the morning is a contest of who can catch the weirdest creature. Ingrid gets a crab with one claw. You find a rock shaped like a pig. Bjorn hooks his own cloak and drags it halfway across the river before realizing. Eventually, your stomachs growl louder than the fish splash, and you retreat to dry clothes and warm bread. Your mother shakes her head at the dripping mess, but says nothing. The fish, your glorious, heroic, slightly undersized prize, is fried in a pan with herbs and a pinch of smug satisfaction. You eat it like a feast, tearing at it, with fingers licking salt off your knuckles. It tastes like victory. It starts with a whisper, not a real one, more like the scratchy hiss of wool against wood, as you and the others crowd beneath the rafters of the longhouse, all hunched around a single candle flame. Ingrid leans forward, eyes wide. They say it walks at night, she murmurs, dragging a chain of bones and licking the walls. You blink. Licking. She nods gravely. The salt. It needs the salt. Bjorn gasps. My wall has salt. Then your next, says Ingrid. And just like that, the game begins. Mainstream historical fact. Viking children, like kids everywhere, told stories, some adapted from adult sagas, and others wholly invented. These tales often blended Norse mythology with local superstitions, creating a kind of homegrown folklore that lived on the lips of little ones far from the fires of skalds. Quirky tidbit. In certain parts of Scandinavia, children believed in the Mara, a night spirit, that sat on your chest while you slept and caused nightmares. To ward it off, some children slept with iron keys or sang lullabies backward. Whether this worked is unclear, but it did make bedtime a little more theatrical. You take your turn. In the western woods, you begin past the dead tree that bleeds if you poke it, lives a shadow goat with no eyes. It steals names. That's why no one knows what happened to Thora. Bjorn gulps. Ingrid raises an eyebrow. That's just a regular goat with mange. You glare. You weren't there. The others shush you as the wind howls outside, rattling the door latch, just enough to feel like a warning. You all instinctively scoot closer to the fire, pretending not to. Historians still argue whether these stories were passed down intentionally, like oral tradition for kids, or simply emerged from shared boredom, bad weather, and too many weird dreams. Either way, they worked. You've never seen a group of children brush their teeth and jump under wool blankets faster, but you're not done. Tonight, the game evolves. Someone suggests acting out the stories. Suddenly, you're crawling across the floor with a blanket over your head, shrieking like a wall-licking ghost, while Bjorn pelts you with clumps of moss. Ingrid throws a ladle. Someone spills goat milk. Your mother storms in. There is a long silence. Then she sighs and starts gathering the spilled moss. At least do it outside tomorrow. Permission granted. The next night, you build a ghost trap out of snowballs and berry juice. Bjorn makes a helmet from a fish bucket. Ingrid sharpens a carrot into a very unsafe dagger. You're not scared, of course. You just check the wall for tongue marks. You know, just in case. It's raining sideways, the wind howls like a wolf with a toothache, and your chores for the day include something horrifying: spinning. Yes, spinning wool. The most unheroic, butt-numbing, finger-pricking task known to Viking kind. You're seated on a lumpy stool next to your aunt, who is already halfway through a basket of raw fleece. She hums while pulling tufts of it apart like she's unraveling clouds. You're supposed to be doing the same, but mostly you're poking it and hoping it catches fire. Mainstream historical fact. Spinning and weaving were essential skills in Viking households, and even children were introduced early, especially girls. Yarn production was crucial for clothing sales and trade. Wool was carded, spun into thread, and then woven on vertical looms, often taking months of tedious labor. Quirky tidbit. Archaeological digs have uncovered tiny spindle whorls, likely used by children, suggesting they practiced alongside adults. And some Norse myths even depict the Fates, the Norns, spinning the threads of destiny, which gave spinning a mystical weight. Though you're pretty sure your destiny is sore fingers and an itchy nose, you sigh dramatically. Why can't I train with the warriors? Because warriors freeze in winter, says your aunt without looking up. Wool keeps them warm. Weavers win the war. You mumble something about wanting to win it with an axe. Historians still argue whether spinning was strictly gendered labor or more fluid depending on household needs. In some rural settlements, boys were expected to help with weaving during harsh months, while girls might herd goats or gather firewood. Everybody did something boring at some point. The real problem, of course, is Bjorn. He shows up at the door soaked through and smiling with absolute menace. "Want to make a yarn monster," he whispers. You look at your aunt. She's busy. You look at the wool. It's asking for it. 10 minutes later, you've turned 3 skeins into a vaguely goat-shaped creature with button eyes and a cabbage for a hat. You christen it Sir Itch-Salot. Bjorn makes it eat some beetroot and then scream in pain. You add a backstory about his quest to steal all the socks from the village. Your aunt finds you mid-performance. There's a long pause, then she mutters, "At least your spindle's not empty," and walks away. You and Bjorn glance at each other and high-five. By evening, the yarn monster is gone. The fleece is mostly tangled, and you've made very little actual progress. But your aunt hands you a scrap of flatbread anyway and says spindle still turns. Good enough. You smile, rubbing a sore fingertip, and think maybe not all heroism involves swords. Some of it involves spinning and cabbage hats. The mud is ankle-deep and squelchy in that deeply satisfying way that makes every adult in the village furious. You, however, are having the time of your life, because today you're building a fortress. Not a metaphorical fortress, a real one complete with ramparts made from Styx moss and very cooperative snails. You and Bjorn are deep in enemy territory, the goat pasture using stones and clumps of turf to create the most impenetrable child-sized stronghold since the dawn of time. Mainstream historical fact. Viking children often mimicked adult activities in their play building, raiding, defending, and farming. Evidence of miniature tools, toy swords, and small-scale wooden shields suggests they actively role-played the adult world around them, especially in safe outdoor environments. Quirky tidbit. Some scholars believe that Norse kids even practiced sieges, tossing pebbles, constructing walls, and playing elaborate attack and defend games, using mud food scraps and whatever livestock would stand still long enough. You and Bjorn are in the thick of it. Your side has 3 watchtowers, okay? Overturned baskets, a moat, a trench filled with suspicious soup water, and a catapult, a bent branch, and a lot of optimism. Ingrid arrives and is immediately declared a rival warlord. She doesn't argue, just begins constructing a rival fortress 2 sheep lengths away and threatens to annex your goats. Tensions rise. Stones are thrown. Oaths are shouted. Someone flings a turnip like a javelin. Bjorn defects halfway through the battle, claiming he was always a double agent. You pelt him with moss and declare yourself supreme commander of the fence post empire. Historians still argue whether these games were sanctioned by adults or just tolerated out of sheer exhaustion. It's possible some parents saw this as tactical training, while others just prayed the children wouldn't burn anything down. By midday, your fortress has collapsed under the weight of a curious cow. Ingrid claims victory. You claim sabotage. Bjorn claims snack time. You all retreat to a pile of sun-warmed stones and share a stolen chunk of honey bread. No hard feelings, Ingrid says, licking syrup off her fingers. Next time you mutter, we dig a deeper moat. That night, you reenact the battle for your baby brother using bread crusts as soldiers. He eats most of them before the story ends, but it doesn't matter. Tomorrow you rebuild, stronger, faster, and with fewer cows. You wake up with straw in your hair and a dull ache in your shoulder, which can only mean one thing: chores disguised as a game are coming your way. Sure enough, your father greets you with that special glint in his eye, equal parts mischief and impending child labor. Today, he says, you learn to throw a spear. Your heart flips. Finally. Something dramatic. Something worthy of sagas and roaring fires. Something that doesn't involve wool or goat dung. You march out to the clearing shoulders, squared wooden spear in hand. Bjorn tags along, chewing a turnip like it's a battle snack. Ingrid brings a target, a wobbly bundle of old hay tied with twine and painted with a terrifying face that strongly resembles your aunt. Mainstream historical fact. Viking boys were often trained in basic combat skills from a young age. Spear throwing, archery, and wrestling were common. Girls, too, might learn to handle weapons in times of crisis or within shield maiden traditions, though this remains debated in scholarly circles. Quirky tidbit. Some Viking children practiced spear throwing using wooden sticks and stuffed straw targets often, while adults supervised from a distance or didn't supervise at all because they were busy surviving. You take your first shot. The spear soars majestically, then veers hard left and stabs the dirt a full 3 feet short of the target. Bjorn applauds anyway. Still alive, he says. That counts. Ingrid nails the hay bundle on her first try. You accuse her of witchcraft. She bows. Historians still argue whether this kind of martial play was purely instructional or also symbolic, training young warriors while reinforcing social roles and honor-based values. In truth, the line between fun and preparation was probably very, very muddy. Literally, the lesson turns into a contest. You each get 5 throws. The winner gets the last honey biscuit. You go all in, squinting like a hawk, adjusting your stance, breathing deeply, like the warriors in your uncle's drinking stories. This time, your spear lands in the target's neck. Ingrid gasps. Bjorn drops his turnip. You accept the biscuit with the solemnity of a crowned king. Of course, glory lasts about 12 minutes. Then the sheep escape. And since you're already holding pointy sticks, guess who gets to herd them back? Cue chaos. You wave the spear, shout commands, and narrowly avoid being trampled by a particularly rebellious ewe. Ingrid suggests diplomacy. Bjorn tries to ride one. It ends badly. By sunset, the sheep are home. The spears are muddy, and your arms ache in ways you didn't think possible. Your father claps your back and says, "Good throwing, bad herding." You grin anyway, because tonight you earned your warrior biscuit. There's a sound that only Viking chickens make when they're deeply offended. It's somewhere between a squawk and an old man's cough, and this morning you're responsible for at least 7 instances of it. You're in charge of egg collecting. Again. And the hens are not thrilled. They stare you down from their nesting boxes like feathered gods of judgment. One in particular, Olga, has pecked you so many times you've started referring to her as your nemesis. She fluffs her feathers, now daring you to try. You reach in, slowly murmuring peace offerings. I'm just here for the eggs. You lay them. I worship them. We all play our part. Olga pecks your thumb, Mainstream historical fact. Viking children contributed to household tasks from an early age, and animal care, including poultry and small livestock, was often assigned to them. Eggs were a valuable source of protein, especially during long winters, and hens needed daily attention. Quirky tidbit. Some Norse households believed that if you angered the household animals, especially egg-laying hens, you could bring bad luck to the family's meals. There were even little charms or rhymes whispered to keep the hens generous. You try a rhyme. Olga pecks harder. Bjorn shows up late holding a single egg like it's made of solid gold. She gave it willingly, he announces. We have an understanding. You snort. You bribed her with oats. He shrugs. Diplomacy. You gather the rest of the eggs, dodging flapping wings and suspicious droppings. Then it's off to the pig pen to refill the trough. You draw the short straw on that one. The pigs are enthusiastic. You're mid-pour when one of them nudges you right into the mud. Face first. A squeal of triumph echoes through the pen like a battle cry. You lie there a moment, pondering life choices. Historians still argue whether children's chores were strictly assigned by age or done more fluidly, depending on the season and household structure. Either way, Viking kids were expected to contribute, and that often meant interacting with creatures that bit, kicked, or pooped in inconvenient places. You return to the longhouse covered in a strategic blend of feathers, mud, and existential crisis. Your mother raises an eyebrow and hands you a rag. Bjorn trails behind, clutching his single perfect egg like a relic. That evening, you sit near the fire, bruised and victorious. The eggs become a glorious skillet of scrambled heaven, and you're granted the first bite for your bravery. Even Olga gets a crust of bread. You make a note to ask for blacksmithing chores next time. Or wolf wrangling. Anything less pecky. The day starts with a bang. Literally, a clay pot explodes behind the longhouse as you and Bjorn accidentally test what happens when you fill it with hot coals and seal it with goat fat. The answer, by the way, is noise fire, and your mother's voice hitting notes only ravens can hear. You're banned from the hearth for the day. So naturally you build a forge, sort of. You and the others gather rocks, soot, a bent piece of iron, and a bellows that's just a goat bladder on a stick. It is in your minds a masterpiece, the Viking equivalent of a science lab. Mainstream historical fact. Viking children were often exposed to crafts like blacksmithing and metalwork from a young age, especially sons of smiths. While they weren't immediately allowed to shape weapons, they learned to tend fires, carry fuel, and observe techniques. Metal tools were precious, and the process of crafting them was almost sacred. Quirky tidbit. Some blacksmiths were considered so vital and so mysterious that Norse legends turned them into magical figures. Myths told of smiths crafting swords that whispered or shattered mountains. In your case, the sword mostly bends and smells weird. Bjorn insists on testing the blade by stabbing a cabbage. The cabbage wins. You pump the goat bladder bellows like a warrior of fire, sweating and covered in ash. Ingrid shows up, nose wrinkling. You smell like regret. Blacksmithing, you grunt proud. She raises an eyebrow. On purpose. Historians still argue whether smithing was considered elite knowledge or simply a practical trade taught through apprenticeship. Either way, you feel like a demigod when your iron rod glows faintly red. Sure, it immediately cools again and looks suspiciously like a fireplace poker, but still. Progress. You name it, Sootfang. By late afternoon, your forge is mostly mud. The bellows has exploded and the cabbage is beyond healing. You call it a day. You display Sootfang on a log near your bed, whispering oaths of future glory to it, while your fingers twitch with blisters. That night, the fire crackles warmly. Your mother tucks a blanket over your shoulders and mutters, "Try not to burn down the house tomorrow." You nod solemnly. Tomorrow you forge again, or maybe bake bread. Something with less fire. You're ankle deep in wet grass, shivering slightly. and holding what can only be described as a mystery object. It might be a piece of elk bone. It might be a broken spoon. Bjorn says it's magical. Ingrid says it's just garbage. You've decided it's a clue, because today you're playing Odin's Eye, a game of epic quests, mystical artifacts, and increasingly absurd rules that change depending on who's winning. Mainstream historical fact. Viking children often created games that combined elements of scavenging roleplay and storytelling. While organized games like Natliker, a kind of ball game, existed, children also invented their own folklore-based adventures, often mimicking gods, giants, and heroes. Quirky tidbit. In parts of medieval Scandinavia, it was common for children to hide small tokens, runes, carved beads, or animal teeth, as part of secret games or initiation-style play. Some of these were rediscovered centuries later, and puzzled archaeologists who assumed they were adult ritual items. Joke's on them. Today's adventure involves finding all three eyes of Odin, which are actually two polished stones, and one goat pellet shaped suspiciously like a bean. You and the others assign roles. Ingrid is a storm witch. Bjorn is a frost giant, and you obviously are the chosen one. You climb a hill to bury the second eye in a sacred, hollow tree stump. On the way down, Bjorn ambushes you with a stick he insists is a lightning staff. You parry with your spear, which is really just a broom handle. There is much screaming. Ingrid appears out of nowhere with a cloak made of reeds and declares she controls the fog. The fog, to be clear, is just your breath in the cold air, but it feels magical. Historians still argue whether this kind of improvisational myth play served as educational narrative training or was simply a fun way to stay occupied. Either way, it embedded Norse cosmology into the rhythms of childhood long before a skald ever recited a stanza. You journey through the swamp of trials, a muddy ditch, consult the talking head, a particularly grumpy goat, and finally discover the last eye under a suspiciously shaped potato. Victory is declared. Bjorn insists on a reward. Ingrid demands a feast. You present 3 cold berries, a hunk of cheese, and a pine cone amulet tied with twine. It is glorious. At night, you sleep with your cloak around your shoulders and the eyes of Odin tucked under your blanket. Just in case frost giants are real. And if they aren't, well, you'll just turn them into cabbages. The wind today smells like fish and seaweed and cold. Not the cozy kind of cold like winter mornings under wool blankets, but the slap-you-in-the-face, snot-freezing kind that makes your bones vibrate, which is how you know it's boat day. Your father says it like it's a treat. Come along, we're checking the nets. You, however, know that checking the nets is Viking for get soaked cold and possibly yelled at by a seagull. Mainstream historical fact. Fishing was a daily reality in many Norse settlements, especially those near the coast or fjords. Children often accompanied adults to learn the basics, hauling nets, gutting fish, even helping to row small boats. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept people fed. Quirky tidbit. Some archaeological finds suggest that Viking children made tiny toy boats from bark or bone, possibly inspired by the longships they saw gliding through fjords. Imagine carving your own Viking fleet while your dad tries to teach you knotwork for the 5th time. You reach the water's edge, nose running, fingers already stiff. The boat rocks gently. You climb in, trying not to look terrified. Your job is simple. Hold the basket, don't drop the fish, and try not to fall overboard. Bjorn joins you with a net and a dramatic flourish. Today, we hunt the sea serpent. You nod solemnly. If it eats me, tell my goat I loved him. The nets come up heavy with actual fish, which is a surprise to everyone. They're slippery, wide-eyed, and judging you. You wrestle them into the basket, trying not to scream when one flops out and nearly slaps your foot. Your father grunts approvingly. Better than last week. Only lost 2. Fish, no, children. Historians still argue whether fishing was gendered labor or shared among all able hands. In coastal villages, survival often depended on collective effort, meaning anyone who could hold a net or gut a cod got conscripted regardless of age or enthusiasm. You finished the job with aching arms and shoes full of seawater. Back on shore, you help clean the catch scale, flying everywhere like weird silver confetti. Ingrid shows up with salt and a very smug face. I built a drying rack, she announces. You blink. Why? Because fish jerky lasts longer than your attention span. She's not wrong. By dusk, you're exhausted, salty, and smell like low tide. But the village will eat tonight. And when your mother serves up crisp pan-fried herring with sour bread, you're offered the first bite. You eat it with dramatic flair. Not bad for serpent meat, you say? Bjorn grins. Next time we go for kraken. You nod, already planning your barkboat fleet. You're hiding in a haystack. Again. To be fair, it's not because you're in trouble this time. It's part of the game. Sort of. You and a gaggle of other Viking kids are deep into an epic session of hide and seek, but it's a battle. A game with rules so complicated, even the adults stopped asking questions. You're the last one hidden. The seeker, currently Ingrid, wearing a wolf pelt hood and wielding a carved wooden club, is stalking the barn with slow, exaggerated steps. You hold your breath. A sneeze tickles. You beg your nose for mercy. Mainstream historical fact. Viking children played structured and unstructured games alike, including variations of tag, hide and seek, and wrestling, all deeply physical and often mimicking adult survival skills. These games built agility, strength, and spatial awareness. Quirky tidbit. Some evidence suggests that Viking kids tied bells or carved tokens to their belts and tried to sneak through fields or longhouses without being heard. A real-life stealth challenge with the added excitement of possibly alerting your goat. You suppress the sneeze and shift slightly. Hay crinkles. Ingrid freezes. Smelled something cowardly, she hisses dramatically, sniffing the air. You break. Sprint from the haystack, screaming and flailing like an underfed berserker. She chases you through the goat pen, over the firewood pile, and into the field where Bjorn and two others are lying in wait. An ambush. There is shrieking. You fall. Someone loses a boot. A chicken becomes collateral damage. Historians still argue whether games like these were meant purely for fun or subtly reinforced tactical thinking and war preparedness. Either way, your thighs hurt and you're bleeding slightly from your elbow, so... Progress. You end the day collapsed under the birch tree with the others panting and filthy. A truce is declared. Bjorn gets crowned Mud King. His crown is unfortunately also mud. That night, you tell your baby brother the story of the Great Haystack Rebellion, complete with sound effects. He applauds by gnawing on your sleeve. You smile. Today you were chased, caught, crowned, and cheered. A good day in any Viking age. You wake up to the smell of something suspiciously burnt and the distant sound of your uncle swearing at a goat. Classic signs of a festival day. It's the midsummer feast, one of those rare occasions when the village smells more like honey-roasted meat and less like sheep-related despair. You spring from your bedding like a warrior summoned to battle because today, you get to perform. Mainstream historical fact. Viking society celebrated seasonal festivals with food, music, storytelling, and games. Children played key roles, carrying offerings, dancing, singing, or even reenacting famous myths. These weren't just parties. They reinforced community bonds and religious rituals. Quirky tidbit. Some Norse children were tasked with dressing as miniature gods or animals during celebrations, wearing painted masks or fur costumes, and performing short scenes, equal parts adorable and terrifying, depending on the execution. You're dressed as Thor. Not the handsome god of thunder from modern stories, but the angry toddler version with a wooden hammer, a sheepskin cape, and charcoal smudges on your face. Bjorn is playing Loki and has somehow glued tiny horns to his forehead. Ingrid is a tree. She seems fine with it. You rehearse your lines, "I smite thee," followed by what is supposed to be thunder, but sounds more like indigestion. Still, you're proud. The villagers gather. The fire crackles. Someone plays a bone flute. You take the stage, a glorified flat rock, and deliver your monologue with shaky but passionate fury. Bjorn cackles, gets struck by your hammer, and flops to the ground like a dying seal. Ingrid waves her arms slowly. "I am a tree," she intones eerily. It brings the house down. Historians still argue whether these performances were religious offerings or just entertainment, but evidence from Norse poetry suggests that role-play and theatrical expression were common in social rituals. Even kids got a chance to steal the show. Later, you join the dance if dance means hopping in a circle while shouting the names of vegetables. There's wrestling, pie-eating contests, and a game where you try to walk across a balance beam holding a bowl of mead. You spill yours immediately, but no one cares. The feast itself is magnificent: smoked fish, barley bread, pickled turnips, honey cakes. You eat until your belt feels treasonous. As the sun finally sinks toward the horizon, because summer nights are never in a hurry, you sit with your friends under a canopy of stars and laugh about your moment of stage glory. Next year, Bjorn says, licking honey from his fingers, "I'm playing Odin." "You're too short," you mutter. "I'll wear stilts." Ingrid nods sagely. The tree approves, and for a long moment, full of firelight and full bellies, you forget the chores, the mud, the chores again, and just feel lucky to be a Viking kid on a good day. The rain starts before dawn, and by mid-morning everything is wet, including your hopes, your socks, and your only dry tunic. You press your nose to the foggy window slit in the longhouse, sighing dramatically. The outside world is a soup of puddles, gray mist, and squelchy regret. Bjorn sits cross-legged beside the hearth, braiding strands of straw into what he insists is a horse. Ingrid is making soup, which appears to involve 1 carrot, a bone, and 6 rocks. "Want to play bones and boards?" she asks, holding up a wooden tile carved with runes. Mainstream historical fact: Viking children passed time during foul weather with board games like Nefataful, a strategic game sometimes called Viking chess. Simpler games involving dice or carved animal bones also existed, blending chance and skill. Quirky tidbit: some gaming pieces were made of whale vertebrae, amber, or walrus ivory. Historians have even found tiny carved pieces buried in children's graves, suggesting these games were valued possessions, possibly even status symbols among Viking youth. You agree to play, mostly because your other option is helping your uncle clean lice out of his beard. Bjorn acts as the referee, wearing a crown made of old reeds and declaring, "Let the tournament commence." Ingrid crushes you in 3 moves. You demand a rematch. She crushes you again. You accuse her of sorcery. She grins and adds a rock to her soup. You're not sure if that's a threat. Historians still argue whether children's games held deeper social meaning. Were they teaching strategy, conflict resolution? Or were they just a way to stay sane in a culture that had months of endless rain, you currently staring at your 3rd straight loss vote for insanity management? The day stretches on. You eventually craft your own set of pieces, pebbles marked with charcoal, and invent new rules out of spite. Bjorn plays your version, promptly cheats, and declares victory. "You stabbed my cow tile with a fish tile," you protest. "See invasion," he replies, deadpan. Eventually, the rain lets up, and you all burst outside like prisoners from a very cozy jail. The ground is a marsh, but it smells of pine and wet bark and something clean. You chase each other in a wild game of tag, slipping and laughing and making footprints that look like Viking runes gone wrong. At sunset, you return to the longhouse, soaked but smiling. Your soup is still simmering. It now contains moss and a single feather. You eat around the rocks, because even Viking kids know never waste a good soup day. You're staring at a loom. Not just any loom, a large, creaky, slightly wobbly beast of a vertical loom that takes up one entire wall of the longhouse. Threads stretch down like tense spiderwebs, and beside it stands your grandmother, eyes-narrowed fingers nimble. Today you learned to weave. You didn't volunteer, of course. You just made the mistake of saying I'm bored within earshot of an elder. Classic rookie move. Mainstream historical fact. Viking children, especially girls but also boys, were expected to learn textile work from a young age. Weaving, spinning, and dyeing cloth were crucial survival skills, and most households produced their own garments. Spindle whorls and loom weights have been found in abundance at Norse archaeological sites. Quirky tidbit. Some Norse weavers wove tiny messages or runes into their cloth secret blessings or charms to protect the wearer. Others even dyed threads with plants like woad and lichens to achieve rare hues, including the ever-controversial Viking purple, which some claim was reserved for high-status individuals. Your grandmother hands you a shuttle, a little carved wooden tool that carries the weft thread and points you to the lowest row. Go under, then over, then under again. Not that one, or that one. Start over. It's like threading a needle while being scolded by fate. Bjorn peeks over your shoulder. That looks easy. You hand him the shuttle. He tangles the entire warp within 6 seconds. Ingrid, who's already halfway through a complicated braid pattern on her own, doesn't even look up. Try not to invent new knots. You persevere. It's oddly soothing, back and forth, like rowing a boat made of string. The rhythm settles into your hands. The fabric begins to grow. Slowly. Lumpy. Imperfect. But yours. Historians still argue whether Viking textiles were utilitarian or deeply symbolic in everyday life. Some scholars suggest patterns carried clan meaning or stories, while others think they just looked nice. You think yours looks like a woolly accident, but a proud one. By evening, your section of cloth is an uneven rectangle that your grandmother says has potential, which you choose to interpret as praise. She gives you a piece of soft blue wool as a reward dyed with elderberries, she says. Later by firelight you stitch a crooked little rune into the edge. Protection, probably. Or maybe help. Bjorn is wearing his weaving as a cape. Ingrid has turned hers into a belt for her wooden sword. You're just proud you didn't get stuck to yours. Weaving, it turns out, is a kind of magic. Slow, deliberate, pattern-bound magic that turns air into armor. And tonight that feels like enough. It's official, you're going to the thing. No, not a monster or a punishment, though it kind of sounds like both. The thing is the village assembly, where adults shout opinions, settle disputes, and pretend not to fall asleep during long speeches. But for you, it's more than politics. It's an adventure. It's drama. Mainstream historical fact. The thing or thing was the legislative assembly in Viking society held at local and regional levels. While adults were the main participants, children often attended, watching debates and learning community laws and social norms. It was part town hall, part court, part gossip fest. Quirky tidbit. Some scholars believe the thing was also a bit of a fairground, featuring traders' games, food stalls, and storytellers. Children might not have had official roles, but they certainly soaked in the spectacle, the performances, and the occasional fistfight over a goat. You walk there with your family, kicking pine cones and humming the sour bread song under your breath. The assembly clears a space in the field. Wooden benches. One tall stone for speeches. A pig on a spit nearby, because what's a debate without snacks? Bjorn is already there, pretending to be the law speaker. He climbs the stone and bellows, "Bring forth the goats of treason." You applaud. Ingrid rolls her eyes and starts sketching something in the dirt with a stick. Soon, the real adults begin. Two neighbors argue about property lines. Someone else claims a chicken insulted his wife. The elders weigh in with impressive grunts. Your uncle mutters same nonsense every year while quietly betting a piece of cheese on the outcome. Historians still argue whether children were formally educated at the thing or simply absorbed knowledge passively. But it's clear that attending taught Viking kids how to speak negotiate, and occasionally, when necessary, yell convincingly. You and your friends form a mini-council behind the fire pit. Ingrid declares herself Queen of Turnips. Bjorn tries to outlaw chores. You create a rule that grants you extra fish if you say 3 rhymes before dinner. It is promptly vetoed. Midday, the traders arrive. They set up blankets displaying beads, carved bone figurines, and mysterious spices. You trade your spare wool sock for a small, uneven ring. It's probably cursed. Perfect. There's wrestling in the far corner. Someone plays a jaw harp. An elder tells a tale about Loki turning into a horse, which raises many questions you are too afraid to ask. By dusk, the thing ends. Disputes are sort of settled. No one died. The chicken is still smug. Walking home, you tuck the cursed ring into your belt pouch and hum the chant of the law speaker speak true. Judge fair. Pass the mead. You might not understand the politics yet, but you understand something older, the rhythm of your people. The way stories become laws and laughter becomes tradition, and that in its own way is a kind of power. You've been awake since before sunrise, not because of chores or a shouting rooster, but because of the huntin'. Well, a training hunt, as your father insists, raising one skeptical eyebrow. But still, there's a bow involved, and possibly deer, and almost definitely mud. Mainstream historical fact. By the time they were 10 or so, Viking boys and sometimes girls began training in the use of weapons and tools, especially in rural or frontier settlements. Hunting skills weren't just for feeding the family. They built strength, sharpened instincts, and prepared youths for potential conflict or exploration. Quirky tidbit. Some children carried practice axes or carved wooden swords, not just as toys, but as learning tools. One grave site even revealed a child buried with a small spear and a wolf's tooth, suggesting that bravery was expected early or at least commemorated. Your father hands you a child-sized bow with a piece of sinew so tight it hums when you breathe on it. You try to look serious. Bjorn whispers, "Don't shoot yourself." Ingrid hands you a small leather pouch of dried berries like a traveling snack or a bribe. The forest greets you with dewy silence. Pine needles crunch underfoot. Your breath fogs. Every bird is suddenly suspicious. You follow tracks, hoof prints in the mud, a broken branch here, a tuft of fur there. Your father nods. Elk. You whisper, "Will we catch it?" He grins. "We'll learn something." Historians still argue whether Viking hunting was mainly for sport sustenance or status. Some say it was tied to ritual, offering the first kill to the gods. Others suggest it was simply survival with style. Either way, it bonded generations through the shared rhythm of chase and stillness. You knock your arrow, you wait. The elk appears antlers like a crown of old branches moving slow and silent through the undergrowth. It pauses, sniffs. You freeze, and then it runs, gone in a blink. You didn't shoot. Neither did your father. You look up. He's smiling. There'll be more. Later, you practice on a log, hitting it once every 5 tries. Bjorn hits it once every 20, then declares the log cursed. Ingrid hits it first, try and says nothing. Back home, you tell your mother you nearly battled a beast. She raises an eyebrow. Did you bring it back? You grin. No. But it knows my name now. That night, under a pelt and next to the fire, you trace the shape of elk antlers into the dirt with your finger. Not everything is about winning. Sometimes it's about becoming the kind of person who could. You've been awake since before sunrise, not because of chores or a shouting rooster, but because of the hunt. Well, A training hunt as your father insists, raising one skeptical eyebrow. But still, there's a bow involved, and possibly deer, and almost definitely mud. Mainstream historical fact. By the time they were 10 or so, Viking boys and sometimes girls began training in the use of weapons and tools, especially in rural or frontier settlements. Hunting skills weren't just for feeding the family. They built strength, sharpened instincts, and prepared youths for potential conflict or exploration. Quirky tidbit. Some children carried practice axes or carved wooden swords, not just as toys, but as learning tools. One grave site even revealed a child buried with a small spear and a wolf's tooth, suggesting that bravery was expected early or at least commemorated. Your father hands you a child-sized bow with a piece of sinew so tight it hums when you breathe on it. You try to look serious. Bjorn whispers, "Don't shoot yourself." Ingrid hands you a small leather pouch of dried berries like a traveling snack or a bribe. The forest greets you with dewy silence. Pine needles crunch underfoot. Your breath fogs. Every bird is suddenly suspicious. You follow tracks, hoof prints in the mud, a broken branch here, a tuft of fur there. Your father nods. Elk. You whisper, "Will we catch it?" He grins. "We'll learn something." Historians still argue whether Viking hunting was mainly for sport sustenance or status. Some say it was tied to ritual offering the first kill to the gods. Others suggest it was simply survival with style. Either way, it bonded generations through the shared rhythm of chase and stillness. You knock your arrow, you wait. The elk appears antlers like a crown of old branches moving slow and silent through the undergrowth. It pauses, sniffs. You freeze, and then it runs, gone in a blink. You didn't shoot, neither did your father. You look up. He's smiling. There'll be more. Later you practice on a log hitting it once every 5 tries. Bjorn hits it once every 20, then declares the log cursed. Ingrid hits it first, try and says nothing. Back home, you tell your mother you nearly battled a beast. She raises an eyebrow. Did you bring it back? You grin, no. But it knows my name now. That night under a pelt and next to the fire, you trace the shape of elk antlers into the dirt with your finger. Not everything is about winning. Sometimes it's about becoming the kind of person who could. You sit at the edge of the fjord, legs swinging over a slab of cold stone, watching the tide roll in. It's quiet here. Quieter than usual. Just you, the gulls, the distant thump of someone chopping firewood, and a crab that's either taunting you or just very confused. You've done a lot this year. You've herded goats, dodged chores, braided wool, lost at board games, won at mud wrestling, outrun a goose-built snow forts, sung terribly, and learned that fish eyes are surprisingly chewy. Not all of it was glorious. Not all of it was fun. But all of it was yours. Mainstream historical fact. Viking children weren't just preparing for adulthood. They were already living complex lives filled with work-play ritual and responsibility. They weren't shielded from the world. They were small but essential parts of it. Quirky tidbit. In some Norse burial sites, children were buried with tools, toys, or even weapons, suggesting that the roles they played in life were deeply respected and that their skills, no matter how young, were seen as vital to the family and tribe. You skip a rock. It bounces once, then sinks. Bjorn joins you, plopping down with a grunt. He says nothing for a moment. Then, do you think we'll raid England someday? You shrug. Maybe. Ingrid appears behind you, both balancing a stack of dried cod, like a priestess of snacks. If we do, she says, I'm bringing my axe. The three of you sit together, staring at the horizon, like you're the captains of your own tiny longships, sailing not toward war, but toward whatever comes next. Historians still argue whether Viking children saw themselves as future warriors, traders, farmers, or storytellers. But one thing's certain: they were raised to meet the world head-on, be it with laughter, stubbornness, or a very large stick. The clouds turn pink. A heron takes flight. And you smile. Because somehow, through chores and chaos and chants and cheese-throwing contests, you've made it. You are a Viking child. And honestly, it's been kind of epic. The longhouse is quiet now. The fire has dimmed to embers crackling softly in the hearth. Outside, the fjord glimmers beneath a velvet sky, moonlight dancing on waves like silver threads through wool. You lie beneath a heavy fur blanket, warm, tired, full of barley bread and stories. Your muscles ache from climbing, running, wrestling, and rowing, but it's the kind of ache that feels earned. Your hair still smells faintly of wood smoke. There's a smear of ash on your cheek from the feast. You let it stay. The wind hums through the thatch above, gentle as breath. Somewhere someone snores. Probably your uncle. Definitely your uncle. Your wooden toy horse lies beside you, its legs worn smooth from hours of galloping across dirt floors and imaginary islands. You hold it loosely now, one thumb rubbing the familiar groove down its spine. Tomorrow will bring more chores, more games, maybe a storm, maybe a story, maybe a chance to learn something new, how to weave tighter, climb higher, or finally beat Ingrid at Hnefatafel. But tonight, there's nothing to do but let the fire sigh and the fur wrap around you like a lullaby. The darkness is not empty here. It is full of memory, of friendship, of mischief and meaning. You close your eyes, and in your dreams, you run through a snowy forest, chasing a deer made of stars, while the gods laugh gently above. Sleep well, little Viking. Tomorrow is waiting. End of script. Sweet dreams.